Good morning to everybody. Welcome to this webinar from IPO. Today we will speak about the role of the competence and expertise of occupational hygiene professionals in improving the safe handling of chemicals. But I will not say any more about this topic because I will leave the floor to my colleagues. I just want to introduce you our organization, IPO, which was constituted in 2021 from a number of national professional association of occupational hygiene professionals in the European continent. We are about 10 organizations. Our overall purpose is improving, promoting and developing the professional practice of occupational hygiene in an European context. The next slide, please. Our objectives for pursuing this general purpose is to gain more visibility of occupational hygiene as a profession in Europe, promoting harmonization of guidelines, standards, methods, procedures, and so on in our field, to become more and more a partner for discussion at the EU institutional level, to discuss the very big topic of training and qualification in occupational hygiene in a context of the common, we hope, EU regulations. Then to exchange practical experiences and knowledge between OH professionals, and to strengthen communication and collaboration between our national associations in occupational hygiene. So a few words for presenting the board of IPO, the European Platform of Occupational Hygiene. We are 10 people, you see here, and then I will present the role and function and activities of each one. The next slide, please. So the working group that worked very hard for organizing this webinar and to prepare a position paper of IPO is made up of 3 people, Kaspar Schmidt, Alessandro Sassi, and myself. The next one, please. Then we have another working group which is working hard on the competency framework for occupational hygienists. It is made up from Rudolf van der Haar, Karen Bafton, and Alessandro Sassi again. The next one, please. Also, we started recently a new working group which is going to build up its team, and the 2 leaders are Kaspar Schmidt again and Hans Torres Medbold. The next one, please. Then we have Steven Verpale, which is our treasurer, and also he guarantees a certain liaison with the standardization bodies at an international level. Also, we have Andrea Hidinga. She is a former member of IOHA, and so she guarantees us a continuous liaison with this International Association of Occupational Hygiene realities. Next one, please. And then also Hans Torres Medbold is also involved in a new joint task force on the profession of occupational hygienist that was constituted by IOHA again, and also ILO, I think. Next one, please. Now I leave the floor to Alessandro and Kaspar, who will present you the topic of this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paolo. And again, good morning also on my behalf. My name is Alessandro Sassi. Today I represent the SOFIT, the French Industrial Hygiene Association. And indeed, it's my pleasure to guide you through our position paper. You see there on the screen the title of the position paper, which is REACH and OSH Legislation, Advancing Safe Chemical Handling Through Occupational Hygiene Expertise. We published this document late in May, and today we will go through the key messages. It will be only a short summary, but I invite you to go and download the full text from our website. In terms of today's presentation, we are going to follow the same structure as the position paper. So we start with a short introduction, and then we will move to discuss what we think are the main achievements of the REACH regulation. And then as a next point, we will talk about our visions for improving the current regulations. This is further split in two. We have a first point on how we think experts should be involved and how the OSH risk assessment should have the priority. And then we will move on a part related to education and guidance. We will close this meeting today with a summary of what we said, so the takeaway message, and open the floor for a Q&A. So let's start from the introduction, and I shall start from a very short context. I know I'm talking mostly to health and safety professional and occupational hygienist, so I will be very quick. So as you know, REACH stands from registration, evaluation, authorization and restriction of chemicals. So this is a comprehensive European regulation that governs chemicals, and in this case, not only in the workplace, but also in consumer products and the environment. The goal of REACH is to ensure that all chemicals on the market are properly assessed, first of all, before they are used or sold. Now, on the other hand, we have OSH. So OSH stands for Occupational Safety and Health. It's actually a set of different pieces of legislation specifically focused on protecting workers from hazards in the workplace this time. Key directives in Europe include the CAD, which is the Chemical Agents Directive, and the CMRD, so the Directive on Carcinogen, Mutagens, and Reprotoxic. Together, they set the minimum requirements for managing chemicals risk at work. Now, you see both REACH and OSH are frameworks designed to control chemical risks, but they do so from very different perspectives. REACH is broader, first of all, because it covers all users of chemicals up to the consumers, while OSH kind of zeroes in on the workplace safety. So, and the workplace is where these regulations overlap, and that's where compliance with both is necessary to ensure worker protection and meet legal requirements. So our paper focuses specifically on the common focus, so the control of workplace chemical risk, where both sets of regulation must be considered at the same time. So, and after the few words on the context, then I guess you may ask yourself why we have a position paper on that, and why now, and why us? Well, why now is simple to reply. There are ongoing regulatory initiatives in order to update the REACH regulation. So, of course, we wanted to be part and heard of that in that discussion. Why us? Occupational hygienists, today represented by the EPO, are experts in the assessment and control of chemical risks in the workplace. So our knowledge makes us that we are the most qualified professional to provide feedback on the effectiveness of the legislation, and specifically on legislation that are designed to control risks to workers' health. Our technical background, risk communication skills, enable us to interpret complex regulation and translate them in practical workplace solutions. At the same time, EPO, as part of its role, facilitate exchanges with key stakeholders, such as labor inspectorates, industry associations, academic institutions, government, and trade unions. We believe that our collaborative approach and our expertise make us that we are uniquely positioned to contribute to the ongoing review and improvement of REACH, ensuring that worker health remains the main focus. So once we have set the context, I'd like to move to the next section of the position paper. So as I mentioned, that's where we talk about the achievements of REACH. And there are many achievements, so I will just make a few examples. And in fact, as EPO, but I think as a profession as a whole, we recognize that since its implementation, the REACH regulation has achieved significant milestones that are, hands down, positively impacted occupational hygiene and workplace health in general. So to make a few examples, one of the most notable achievement is the principle of no data, no market. And this has led to comprehensive toxicological assessment of chemicals. It has facilitated the identification of previously unknown hazards and the establishment of evaluation criteria such as the DNLs, the derived no effect levels, and the DMLs, the derived minimal effect levels. And this has been done not only for inhalation, but also for the very first time, we have a complete set of criteria for skin exposure. REACH has also improved access to information through the portal of the ECHA, the European Chemical Agency, providing us as health and safety professionals with the data that we need for effective risk assessments. This regulation also works in tandem with the CLP regulation, so the one on classification, labeling, and packaging. And together they enhance the harmonization of hazard identification across the European Union. Perhaps above all these achievements, the most important is that REACH restrictions and authorization process has played a crucial role in eliminating some hazardous chemicals from the workplace, strengthening the risk management practices and improving overall workplace safety. We do therefore recognize that REACH has a very important role in advancing chemical safety and occupational health since its implementation. All right, I'd like now to move to the next section, so talk about what we see as possible recommendation in this context of recognizing the achievements, but also saying and suggesting how we can improve further from there. And in order to do that, the first thing I need to do is to tell you what we think that could be further improved. So where are the problems? And then we will move to our suggestions. So we already say that the scope is different. We say that REACH deals with environment, consumer safety, and workplace chemicals. If we focus only on workplace chemicals, however, the scope of the OSH legislation is structurally broader than the scope of REACH in several critical areas. And again, you see there a number of examples. So from the beginning, OSH covers chemicals that are exempt from REACH, such as pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, and naturally occurring substances. OSH also addresses process-generated substances like welding fumes and wood dust, which REACH only partially covers. OSH considers combined exposures, including chemical mixtures and physical hazards, whereas REACH does not. Additionally, REACH assessments are typically generic and manufacturer-driven, while OSH assessments are tailored to specific workplace conditions. OSH places greater emphasis on the hierarchy of controls and specifically requires ongoing verification of the control measures, such as, for instance, through exposure measurement, and that is contrary to REACH. So this difference in scope are very important to the points that we are trying to raise through this presentation. So we thought we would further explain them through a few examples. And the first example that we prepared, you see that on the screen, concern welding. Now, welding is a very common industrial process, and as you know, it produces hazardous fumes. The welding fumes by itself are considered carcinogen, but they also can contain a variety of hazardous substances, and just to name a few, think chromium-6, manganese, nickel, lead, and so on. It goes without saying that exposure to these substances can pose significant health risk to workers if they are not correctly controlled. Now, here the approach of the two framework is very different. Under occupational safety and health legislation, welding fumes are recognized as workplace hazards. And then, as per any other hazard, OSH would require that welding fumes are assessed in the context of the actual work environment. And typically, these would lead to the implementation of control measures, such as local exhaust ventilation, personal protective equipment, and perhaps regular exposure monitoring. On the other hand, REACH, because it primarily focuses on chemicals as they are manufactured or imported, it does not necessarily deal with substances generated by workplace processes. So process-generated substances like welding fumes are only partially covered, and that means that some workplace exposures may not be fully addressed by REACH requirements alone. So effective protection of workers require recognizing the limitation of REACH and the importance of workplace-specific OSH assessment. For activities like welding, OSH-driven risk assessment and control are essential to ensure worker safety. Our second example attempts to illustrate what can happen basically daily in workplaces. What you see on the screen is a picture of a sampling point. Under REACH, the manufacturer communicated that a closed sampling point system for a given chemical is required. And the user of the chemical actually installed such a system. And you see there is a way to ensure that the sampling bottle here is tightly screwed so that there is no leakage possible, and then there is an additional secondary containment. However, what happened in practice in this specific case is that some workers started to take shortcuts, and they started to use a side push valve because, well, it's faster, probably did not understand fully the implication, and ended up breaking the containment. This is just an example of human factors that must be addressed through education and unavoidably enforcement. Occupational hygienists are trained to understand why this situation occurs, and they help to modify the workplaces and behaviors to improve safety. In order to do that, as occupational hygiene professional, we typically operate within the OSH legislative framework rather than the REACH. OSH provides the tools for doing that. REACH, on the other hand, focuses on placing substances on the market. OSH aims to prevent long-term health effects. So my last example concern the need to keep on verifying controls over time. So under REACH, once control measures are implemented, there is no explicit requirements to continuously verify their effectiveness. In contrast, OSH mandates ongoing verification. And that means that chemical users must regularly test and confirm that the control measures, such as ventilation system, are working as intended over time. And you see, continuous verification is crucial because workplace conditions can change, equipment can degrade, and new risks can emerge. And without these regular checks, there is a risk that control measures may become ineffective, putting workers' health at risk. So we have these two pieces of legislation, these two frameworks actually, and you see the scope is different. And when you zoom in on workplace chemical, OSH provides a broader scope and more tools available. At the same time, also their methodology is different. And in fact, REACH and OSH, they employ different tools and standards for risk assessments. And that can lead to divergent conclusions for the same chemical and the same use. Both REACH and OSH assess risk by combining data on toxicity and exposure. But these data are derived or generated in a different way. So if we start from toxicity, within REACH, we rely on DNLs and DMLs, whereas on OSH, we use occupational exposure limits. These values are derived through separate processes and may differ significantly based on the methodology and the update frequency. Likewise, there are differences in how the exposure data are obtained. So OSH assessments mostly incorporate observation of actual activities, modeling, and measurement techniques, providing a more thorough understanding of specific workplace exposures. So if you're not familiar with these terms, modeling means using a predictive tool that based on a number of workplace parameters, such as the duration of exposures or the type of ventilation. So the tool come up with an estimate of the actual exposure. Whereas a measurement is something that involves instruments and through actual tools and techniques provide a more precise value of what is the exposure of the workers. So OSH uses a combination of all these techniques, selecting the most appropriate one depending on cases. In contrast, REACH assessments are based on exposure scenarios that are provided by manufacturers. And in turn, these exposure scenarios are based almost exclusively on modeling. So there is a narrow set of tools which is made available within the REACH context. So different scope, different tools, but also the compliance philosophy is different. Compliance within REACH requires that users verify that their specific use aligns with the condition described in the exposure scenarios and that are being given by the supplier. If there are discrepancies, the user of the chemical must consider alternatives, such as using a different chemical, using a different supplier, modifying the way they use it, or even submitting their own chemical safety assessment. In contrast, the OSH risk assessment determines the acceptability of a task based on the actual exposure data specific to the workplace. So in this context, the data are not provided by suppliers, but are generated locally, as I said, by modeling or measurements. And the OSH assessment checks the acceptability of the current situation as opposite to determine the match with a pre-worked set of conditions and controls. So you see quite a number of differences, and it's important to note that both these frameworks apply at the same time, and both are mandatory. There are practical implications of these differences, and they can be significant for workplace safety and regulatory compliance. You see, when you have conflicting standards, this can result in inconsistent results, so inconsistent risk assessments, and we are not really told what to do in that case. So, and that could potentially end up compromising worker protection. It also goes without saying that this is a double assessment, and that seems redundant and ineffective in an age when competitiveness is key. As a matter of fact, the double assessment deviates resources of health and safety professional that could be rather invested in dealing with more human behaviors and workplace-specific factors can substantially influence exposure levels, necessitating expert judgment and tailored assessment. These challenges, according to us, highlight the need for skilled occupational hygienists who can ensure robust risk management practices. And the current REACH regulation provides little room for that. So, and this brings us to our first suggestion for the improvement of the current situation. So it is our opinion as EPO that under specific conditions, a robust OSH risk assessment can and should replace the REACH compliance checks and exempt for that. So I said under specific conditions, so that would include that a workplace-specific assessment is conducted by qualified experts. It would imply adherence to good occupational hygiene practices, as well as demonstrating the compliance, with all relevant exposure limits. We think, however, that despite this suggested change, all other REACH obligations should still remain. So we think of authorization, restriction, upstream communication, and that would still remain applicable. This integrated approach would ensure comprehensive risk management and regulatory adherence while optimizing available resources. This way of harmonizing the risk assessment methods and standards across REACH and OSH would promote consistent and effective regulatory practices, avoid redundant work, and at the end, strengthen the workplace safety. So we also have a second suggestion related to the REACH regulation, and that is concerning education and guidance. And as before, I'll start by describing why we think there is a need there. And I think it's pretty broadly recognized that there is a need for enhanced education and training among health and safety professionals regarding REACH concepts and obligation. As a matter of fact, nowadays, they are mostly a matter of a limited number of experts. Sadly, many professionals are not fully aware of the requirement related to exposure scenarios, upstream communication, and the significance of DNLs and DMLs. We think that additional guidance would be needed to clarify enforcement rules and provide practical tools for applying workplace information. In fact, there are significant opportunities to enhance the collaboration between REACH and OSH experts with synergies that could improve chemical safety and occupational health overall. So on one hand, harmonizing the risk assessment methods, as in our first suggestion, can lead to more consistent and effective regulatory practices. But on the other hand, improved implementation and communication strategy will also further strengthen workers' protection. So in terms of our suggestion with respect to that, we think that if we want to better disseminate the REACH concepts, it is more effective to tap in already existing channels. So professional associations already play a crucial role in education and guidance, and they are a linking pin for knowledge dissemination and stakeholder engagement. So because of that, professional associations, such as the National Occupational Hygiene Organization, would be well positioned to play a major role in REACH education by organizing continuous professional development initiatives. We advocate for a train-the-trainer approach that would maximize the effectiveness of educational programs, ensuring that health and safety professionals are equipped to implement the REACH requirements effectively. We shall note, however, that currently most industrial hygiene associations within Europe do not have sufficient size and resources to provide this kind of support. So these efforts would therefore require support from authorities, including the provision of training materials, resources, and the formal recognition of the role of the profession. Oops, sorry. So that covers our two suggestions and our visions as EPO on the interaction of the two pieces of the two legislation. I will now give the floor to Caspar for a summary of what we said and the take-home message.
Thank you, Alessandro. Yes, we are slowly reaching the end of this webinar. I have the pleasure to close that presentation with one central message. Today, we talked about REACH and OSH and how they work together. And yes, this is an important topic for hygienists. We could discuss that for hours. Obviously, there's plenty of details to deal with. But the uncomfortable truth Alessandro just mentioned. Our biggest problem is not the complexity of these regulations and interactions. The biggest problem is that on most workplaces, there is no hygienist at all. There is the problem. Because without a trained professional who understands and can implement these regulations, whether it's REACH or OSH or a combination, even the best rules remain theory. The reality in many workplaces looks different, especially in small and middle-sized companies. REACH seems to get through, is available with the safety data sheets. Sometimes they're better, sometimes they are worse, but they're available. However, OSH struggled for the last decades to actually be applied in workplaces, mostly due to absence of hygienists. Again, especially in small and middle-sized companies. The safety data sheets are available, but they're not understood. They're often ignored, even thrown away, because the general knowledge about safety and health protection is quite minimal in many companies. So the essence of our message is the perfect regulation is completely useless without the expertise to actually implement it. And who has the expertise? It's the occupational hygienist. So this is exactly why EPO was created a few years ago. Not just to develop some position papers on REACH, but above all, to give the occupational hygiene profession a bit more visibility, to build one common European voice, to be a contact point for EU institutions, and to drive harmonization and of our own education and standards within the European continent. So the priority should be get more hygienists in more workplaces. Only then the details of these regulations truly matter. So that's the most essential point, and I look forward to any questions that are in the chat or in person.
just looking here. I've had no questions come through the chat just yet. So I don't know if anybody wants to come off mute and have a conversation at all. You can raise your hand via the little hand icon at the top, or just unmute yourself and say hello. Oh, yeah, from Alison. Yes, Alison, do you want to just come off mute there and
Yes, I'm Alison Margery. I've been heavily involved in the REACH piece and see the complexities and the difficulties of trying to implement within the workplace. So I would just like to say that I'm very, very supportive of this initiative to come across with all of the bringing together all of the different countries and to try and bring visibility to the need for occupational hygiene. And a very nice presentation, well presented, and you have my full support if that is worth anything.
Oh, come on, certainly it is. Thank you very much. That's nice to hear.
Excellent. Thank you, Alison. Yep. So Esther, again, do you want to just come off mute there? Thank you.
Yes, sure. Thank you. Well, I'm new in this organization, but I'm very interested. I work at the chemical industry, where we produce chemicals, but we also use chemicals. And I agree with you that it is a different approach between REACH assessments and OSH assessments. However, we are trying to combine it by looking at the contributing scenarios, use the DNLs or the DMLs available, and then try to make a simple estimation of the exposure using the REACH TRA models. And only then when your exposure is higher than the safe values of the DNL, we have to go in more details to perform the assessments. And what I noticed within our company, that a simple tier 1 assessment is difficult because it doesn't provide the correct details yet. So a measurement is even better. However, it gives you a first impression about do I have a risk, yes or no? So we are not using the exposure scenarios, but we are using the contributing scenarios. So we look at PROC 1 or 2 or 8 or 15, and that is making realizing also the industrial hygiene that you have, well, that there is a certain kind of standardization in REACH that might be of interest also for the activities they have to assess. So I think
Esther,
tools are very helpful.
So I'll attempt to reply first, and then Paolo, Casper, feel free to jump in. I think what you are trying to highlight is the importance of modeling in the process, right? So the use of tier 1 tools or contributing scenarios.
Correct.
And as EPO, we are not saying that we should not use them. Quite the contrary, we are convinced that modeling is in many cases necessary. That will happen typically when you don't have an occupational exposure limit, so we have no method for measuring, for instance. So that's exactly the contrary. We think that we need to have all these different tools available. We have different techniques for measuring, different technique for modeling. We have our judgment as expert, etc. And what we are trying to say is that REACH limits that almost only to modeling, and it loses in opportunities by not providing us the tools to use a more broader panel of tools available. So that's kind of remark that we have.
But are there then specific tools that you promote, or do you think no, measurements, personal monitoring is, well, of course that's the best, but well, quite intensive also for the operators. But do you promote certain tools or not?
You mean as EPO? Not specifically. Of course, we always say we need to be aware of the scope and limitation of each tool, and then there will be a selection based on that. But there is no specific tool which is endorsed by the EPO.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
But I would,
yeah, the tendency is to first do an assessment with tools, and then when you have when you have a red result, exposure is higher than a safe value, yeah, then you continue with measurements. That is what the approach that at least we do in the company.
Mm-hmm.
I would guess that's a good approach, especially as the tools can be applied systematically. So you can estimate the exposure with the tool systematically through all the chemicals you have, and then focus on the problems you see. I think that's a good approach.
Okay, thank you.
May I address something about it as well, please?
Of course.
Okay, my name is Eric van Deurzen, occupational hygienist within RPS Tetrotech, Netherlands. And what we often see as well, and it's a little bit in line what Esther mentioned before, is that the approach when first estimating and then conducting measurements, we also see often that occupational or industrial hygienists are not totally aware about the fact what measuring means. So let's say the theory behind the practical exposure assessment. So are you aware of detection limits? Are you aware of measurement durations, certain types of sampling heads, and so on? In case you have a non-detect, is it because you do not have any exposure at all? Or is it because that the configuration of your measurement equipment and device is not correct? I think that's very important to address as well. So there are not sufficient occupational hygienists or industrial hygienists, whatever you want to call it. But next to that, they also need to be aware of that, let's say, configuration of your measurement device, so that you at least can assess exposure and to assess the result the way you have to do it according to the compliance criteria mentioned in the EN 689.
So I can summarize. If you say, if I understand you correctly, is that the measuring is a very good tool. However, you have to actually master it. So the education on how to measure the theory, the reality is crucial for measurement, and that is education of hygienists in general. I fully agree.
Exactly. Thanks for summarizing. And I think if necessary, we can provide a next webinar on that if it's needed or if it's requested.
Yeah, it's interesting, Eric, and thank you very much for the contribution, because if you remember at the beginning when Paolo was presenting our main activities, we have one which is on what we call a competence framework, where we are trying to define a pattern for an occupational hygienist to be an occupational hygienist. So what kind of competences we need to acquire before we can be recognized as such professionals. And we do that because there are needs, as you explained better than I can do, and also because we have different approaches throughout the Europe, which we would benefit from harmonizing. So it's a very good point. We recognize it as EPO. We are working on it as well.
Okay, thank you.
If I can add some word about this topic, I would like to say that occupational hygienists are not expert of everything. We are working on the competency framework, and there are a number of specializations or topic of interest. For example, an expert of noise cannot be necessarily expert of chemical measurements, but I think that an occupational hygienist must know how to get reliable data for establishing exposures. Maybe he could be not the person doing or mastering the measurements, but he or she must know how to get reliable data for doing reliable assessment.
I completely agree with that, but I was just mentioning this point because the entire talk was also about chemical exposure assessment. I mean, chemicals, sorry for that. So I agree, noise or vibrations are different topics which also need to be in the competency framework, but especially for the chemical substances, we address such, let's say, challenges to get reliable results. And we often get that question as well. So that's why I was making this point.
Thank you.
Paolo and Alessandro, maybe we should open the chat. I've seen a few questions there. The first one that came in, I've seen something about artificial stone silicosis. If I understand it correctly, this is exactly one of the issues kind of we addressed. We said, yes, if there were a hygienist looking at that workplace, this hygienist would probably act on that question. But if he's absent, then obviously nothing happens. Then there is another one.
I'm sorry, Caspar, I interrupt you, but I think Deb, who wrote the comment on the chat, was having the hand risen. So I don't know if you have a question or a comment.
Well, I'm concerned about the artificial stone. You probably know that artificial stone with more than 1% crystalline silica in it has been banned in Australia. We're now being offered products with amorphous silica and feldspar, and there's no evidence that they are going to be, in inverted commas, safe. They're probably safer than crystalline silica stone, but there's no evidence around it, and there's certainly evidence that those things are not completely inert. And I think I would like to have seen REACH take some action on this and on the new products, because the kind of places they go to don't do health and safety regulations. They're little places run in the UK, the US, and in Australia. It was immigrant workers in small workshops who were affected and who have died as a result of this. So it's clearly a gap in the legislation that it doesn't pick up entirely predictable waste products when substances were handled as expected. And I would like to know how we can improve that and close up that gap.
Yeah, but sadly, it's not going to be REACH the solution, because it's as Caspar was saying a minute ago, is a process-generated substance, and where there is a way you consider it a waste or a process-generated substance, both are excluded from the REACH scope. So REACH doesn't have the tools really in terms of the way it is designed and legislation in order to deal with such an hazard. Is a limitation that we need to be aware of, and
maybe
this has
it
to
needs
be
to be changed.
Yeah, but that's exactly what we are trying to suggest, that there is something wrong,
yes.
And then we suggest a solution. But I think the main point is to recognize that there is a problem at the beginning, right? Back to you, Caspar. You want to go ahead with the questions?
No, well, there's just a few other topics that have been addressed. One is the reaction on the discussion on quality of measurement. So Stephen added the EN 689, which is obviously the kind of a gold standard how to measure. That is a very good and thorough kind of guidance. However, it is very expensive to do. So this is a known issue. Somebody mentioned that this is now in one of the EU guidances, referencing this this EN guidance. That is it's interesting. Yes, I didn't know that. But this is just supporting our message, if I understand that correctly. Then there is one question about how to deal with OEL and DNEL that are contradictive. Yeah. So maybe, Alessandro, can you say something on how you would approach that if you have two different values?
Well, in fact, I don't have the reply. But that's part of what we were trying to highlight. It is certainly not specifically addressed by the current legislation. What to do when you have two different values? Do you have to comply with the lowest one, with both of them? You can choose. The practice, but it's just a practice, is that DINEN is used only in the context of REACH, and OELs are used in the context of OSH verification, which would imply measurements and so on. But it's a gray area that we stressed in the paper, and we would benefit from clarity in this sense. For sure, the vision at the beginning, when REACH was first designed, was that we would have gradually switched to using DINELs and DIMELs as reference value. But then we clashed with the practice because there have been a number of issues in the way it has been derived, the way they are updated, and so on. So this could not be the case eventually. And then the legislation did not go up to the end of the reasoning, at least currently, and it's a point that we are raising as well.
I see one other topic that refers to my final words that said, get more hygienists in more workplaces. And the mentioning of Norway that requires hygienists, or I don't know exactly how, but hygienists at workplaces. And the question whether EPO is working towards something like that. I don't know how to answer. EPO is obviously only a board. That means we are somehow a one unit that can discuss topics on EU level. So meaning if we would be asked to do something, that the start of it should come from the national associations. And it could be obviously a task for EPO to work towards a requirement to have occupational hygienists at workplaces, but they are done on national level. So it is a detour somehow through Europe. I don't know. Maybe Paolo, do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah. I just want to add that the fact that we are working for promoting the importance of the role of occupational hygienists as a profession is for that we are working on the competency framework, just to define the requirements and the skills that occupational hygienists must have. And this is a work that is aimed to outline the importance of the role of occupational hygienists in helping manufacturers, companies, and medium, little, and bigger to implement occupational hygiene measures for protecting workers' health. So our role is that of making some lobbying action that is making our voice more and more hearable by institutions, authorities, and so on. And for that, we will be very happy adding other national associations to our board that actually counts 9 European association of occupational hygiene professionals. So that's our work, and we hope that it helps promoting the implementation of health protection in firms, in companies.
Is there any question in the chat that we haven't addressed?
Yes.
Then please speak.
Yep, we've got Eric's hand there. So Eric, if you just want to come off mute.
Yes. Well, thank you, first of all, for this very clear presentation. I think it's good to have information from both the reset and the OSH sides to present here to this group of people. To my experience, we come from very different perspectives. We were with, a group of toxicologists who mainly focus on REACH, and occupational hygienists who are really on the practical side, going to the locations, assess risks at the workplace. But when it comes down to the details, we sometimes see that we have a very different approach, and that it's very, very hard to talk to each other on the specific details which are required for locations where we come. But is there any plan on training, or like a meeting in the middle principle, that we can sit together, maybe a practical training to make toxicologists more familiar with the OSH side, and the other way around, that the maybe more academic side and more research side from the toxicologist is presented to the occupational health specialist?
Stephen, you want to reply?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can answer this. Yes, the answer is yes. And, you know, it is in the chat. I think Michelle asked that question. You know, within the ISCS Europe, we are also, well, you know, these exposure scientists, which are broader and mainly, you know, consisting of groups of toxicologists, epidemiologists, and so on. So we are currently, and I think, you know, the first batch of training slides or slide packs are online at the ISCS Europe. So, you know, there is a competency framework developed also over there. And, you know, I'm also working together mainly with Alison O'Connolly from Dublin University, and to look into, you know, how can we integrate occupational hygiene in that whole story, because it is indeed an important part of REACH. And indeed, you know, it's like you said, Eric, it's quite correct. You know, the main assessments are done by toxicologists and epidemiologists, and you know, we are not speaking the same language. So, you know, there are things moving forward on that, and we're working on that. Of course, you know, we cannot really expect, and that is for everything, you know, to just solve all the problems within 1 week. That, you know, it will take time, but indeed, you know, there are activities within ISCS that is linked, you know, with EPOH as an international relationship within those associations to work on that. If that answers your question.
Thank you, Stephen. Very helpful.
Excellent. Well, I'm just conscious of time there. We've just come up to 10 o'clock. So I don't know if there's any other questions you want to take, or I was thinking I can take all the questions that have been asked, and we can put a document together with the answers that you've given. Obviously, it's been recorded today as well, so please feel free to watch this back for any of the answers you may need to revisit. But is there anything else to sign off from any of the speakers today? Or are you happy?
No, I think we can indeed stop here. I would like just to thank all the participants once again for being with us. Of course, this is just the first step in our attempt to advocacy for this position paper. We will also reach out for other stakeholders. But yeah, thank you so much. If you have any comments, we have an email at the EPO website that you can use for suggestions and questions. Other than that, have a good rest of the day and a good week ahead.
Perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And yeah, keep an eye on the EPO and BOHS websites in the future for further webinars. And have a good week. I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much
bye.
to you all.
Thank you very much.